Turn that into a bigger round of applause for Aletha as she comes up.
In 1995, at the age of 57, my father died. And he was not only the kindest person you would ever want to meet, he was the most principled. The year before he died, some of his colleagues came to him and said that they'd learned that his name was on the list of the people being considered for the Nobel Prize in Economics that year. And since the prize is never given posthumously, they asked him if he wanted them to inform the prize committee that he was terminally ill. And without any hesitation, my father said, "Please do not do that." I remember the day that he told me that he was not afraid to die. He said that he'd had a good and happy life, and that his only fear was that he was letting me down. When he told me he was worried about me, I would have liked to have been able to say, "Don't fret, I'll be all right." And I may even have attempted a lie along those lines. But the truth is, in those days, my life was a mess. I had no job. I'd often stay up all night and sleep all day. And I had an eating disorder that took up huge amounts of my spare time, although I had no job, so really all my time was spare. I loved stories, so I tried to get a job reading to the blind, but I showed up half an hour late to the interview and then started crying in the middle of it. I loved movies, so I applied to be a ticket taker for Sony Cinemas, but even they wouldn't hire me. I still remember the afternoon when I pawned a couple of Billy Joel CDs so I could buy lunch. So if anyone ever tells you that Billy Joel is good for nothing, you tell them, no, he's good for chicken. If things were bad when my father was dying, they got worse after he was gone. I finally made an appointment to see a grief counselor, but I showed up 55 minutes late to the appointment and then spent the whole time I was there crying. So there was grief, but there was no counseling. A friend told me I was depressed, but I quibbled with the term, and I didn't want to take some drug. It didn't seem to me so much that my brain chemistry was off as that I'd made a sober appraisal of the world and wasn't sure I wanted any part of it. I'd like to say there was some epiphany or some big breakthrough moment, but the truth is, things just gradually, slowly began to get better. I got a job, I got a dog, and I started to think that maybe I would be able to forge a life after all. And I wanted to tell my father. I got this idea that I would write him a letter and leave it on his grave. And I wanted to do it on New Year's Eve because that seemed a fitting day to mark a new beginning. The only trouble was I'd been so sorrowful the day we buried him that I hadn't paid any attention to where the cemetery was. He'd lived in New Canaan, Connecticut, so I assumed he was buried in the New Canaan Cemetery, but when I got there, it was cold and dark, and nothing looked familiar. Nothing looked familiar because I not only had the wrong cemetery, I had the wrong state. By the time I'd phoned some relatives, discovered he was actually buried in Banksville, New York, and gotten there, it was approaching midnight. I still couldn't find the cemetery, so I flagged down a car and asked for directions. The driver knew where it was, but as he drove away, I remember thinking that it perhaps wasn't my smartest to have let a creepy-looking guy alone in his car at midnight know that I was on my way to a cemetery by myself. But by the time that thought occurred to me, it was too late. I finally found my father's grave, and as I laid the letter on it, I told him that everything he had given me and taught me hadn't been wasted, and that I knew things hadn't looked so promising for a while there, but that I'd found something that brought me a lot of joy, writing. And I was beginning to think that maybe everything would be all right. And as soon as I said the words, all right, I saw over in some trees, there were no lights at the cemetery, but there was this big moon, and I saw a rippling flash of moonlight against a man's shirt. I don't know what it is about fight or flight that creates this sensation of vertical drop, but I remember thinking, oh, this must be what it feels like when you lose control of your bowels. I also remember thinking, wow, I never would have believed anyone would have the audacity to come and kill me at my father's grave, but I guess I was wrong. Well, live and learn. By the time I raised my eyes and realized it was not a man's shirt rippling in the moonlight, but an American flag on top of a grave, I felt as if I'd lived through the kind of rite of passage I must have subconsciously been seeking. Before I left, I put my hand on my father's headstone and told him now he really didn't have to worry about me, because not only had I found something that I loved in the world, but from then on, if I wanted to visit a graveyard, I would do it in daylight. Thank you.
Man, another round of applause for Alethea Black. Yeah.